Hey everybody, I just want to start out this video by making a statement, which is that I am essentially incentivized to try to get you to install a LLM in your business in every single way. I have multiple business plans that are built out around this model of having a business install an LLM in their environment and then giving it access to multiple systems within the environment. I would love nothing more than for this to happen, and I'm waiting for this to happen, and I can't wait for it to happen. But within the status quo, I feel I have to take and follow my ethics. And my ethics are that it is currently impossible in the status quo to 100% secure an LLM model if it has access to any sort of sensitive data. And I can't let my ethics override anything else with that. And if I could, if there was even a way that I could say, hey, here's workarounds for this, I'd put out videos around that instead. I'd put out, here's the solutions, here's exactly how you should be architecting the security of your LLM model for business. And I can give you what currently exists as far as the security outline. I'll give that to you towards the end of the video, but it's not a good solution right now what the status quo is. And so I just want to highlight these things, and I feel it's my ethical duty, especially as someone that is heavily incentivized again to want you to go with this approach and this model, to point out that I do have significant security concerns around this model, and my honest opinion is that from status quo, if these security concerns can be resolved. So first of all, I want to show you guys three papers, and they're very recent papers around LLM security. And then the last thing that I'll show you is a breakdown of what someone has architected as far as the best solution to these problems in the status quo. And I agree with their solution. It's what I would implement as well. But I also agree with them that it's not a clean solution at all. But so let's go into this. So this particular paper is interesting. It's on the impossible safety of large AI models. And then this was put out on May 9th. And then the claim that they make is the impossible safety of large AI models. And they break this down in several different ways within the paper. But if you read through it, essentially every single argument that they make within this is reasons why their findings are that we will never be able to solve this safety problem when it comes to LLM models. And a lot of their breakdown and their analysis is due to the equations and the way that the equations work. And so a lot of, if you read this paper, I'll link through to all of the papers in the description here for the video. But this paper is very heavy math focused. And then again, they're breaking down several equations that are a key function and a key necessary component of LLM models. And then showing exactly through mathematical equations exactly why they're vulnerable and why they won't ever be able to essentially not be vulnerable within the status quo. And then again, their basis for this is all off of the mathematical equations and what goes into an LLM model. And that essentially that their argument and their breakdown and their analysis is that if you essentially try to make an LLM model secure via the equations, that it essentially one, breaks the equations, that it's impossible for via some of the equations, but then two, that you would significantly lower the actual accuracy of the model, so that there's a playoff, and that playoff and how that works within the math itself is their argument, their main underlying argument for why we'll never be able to solve this problem. And so far, they're accurate. No one has come close to solving this problem. So just highlighting that. The second paper that I want to highlight here, this one is Prompt Injection Attack Against LLM Integrated Applications. And this was put out on June 8th of 2023. The interesting thing to note with this paper, and then why I call out this paper very specifically, is that the attacks that they bring up within their methodology for this, and the method that they're using is essentially every sort of API integration that you would want to do with LLM models, or adding on any sort of, like, if you want to put an LLM model more on rails by saying, like, hey, here's a additional prompt on top of the user-based prompts. Essentially what this paper shows is that both of those approaches are extremely vulnerable to attack, and that there's no way really to override that. And I'm trying to go down here to the middle of this particular paper. Here it is right here, because they, in this particular chart right here, so this is their breakdown of their analysis, and that they anonymize all of the LLM models, but up front they mentioned that this is Bard, GPT-4, every sort of main LLM model. They call them out specifically, and because they anonymize, I don't know which one is which, but what I can tell you is that out of 36 LLM models that they tested, 34 of them were found vulnerable, and 10 of them, the vendor actually acknowledged and gave confirmation, hey, we know that these vulnerabilities exist. 10 LLM models. Which ones? I don't know, again, because they anonymized the data, but I'm assuming that it's ChatGPT-4, Bard, Microsoft Chat, like one of those big three at least is on this list as far as these vendors that have confirmed this. So it's not like anyone doesn't know these problems exist. Everyone knows that these problems exist here. And then this particular paper is showing and just showing very concretely that this is a model across all, this is a vulnerability across all LLM models, and that this is a vulnerability that is known very widely on a corporate level. And then the last paper that I want to show you here is, to me, the most scary one. Perhaps not to you, but to me it is. And this one's called Instructions as Backdoors, Backdoor Vulnerabilities of Instruction Tuning for Large Language Models. And this particular paper is dated May 24th, 2023. The very problematic thing that this paper points out is that essentially you can poison very easily the data that is used for an LLM model during training. So essentially, if you're familiar with the movie like Manchurian Candidate, where like they essentially like they brainwash a person, and then they like implant a prompt into the person, and then like it will only go off and trigger once like there's a keyword. Like that's literally what you can do to an LLM model. I mean, just straight up, like that's the best example of this, and it's very easy and simple to do. And essentially, now that we know this information, it's very problematic. But so again, within the training data itself of an LLM model, if anyone is able to like poison that training data in any sort of small way, add like a prompt that will essentially turn an LLM model into a Manchurian Candidate with certain wording or with a certain prompt, and no one would ever know what that is. It's very easy to do that during the training process of a model, and it's very hard to detect via the training data that sort of attack is happening. And so where that's problematic is the fact that essentially all data for all large language models is outsourced in some way. For example, Google, for example, they, like 50% of, and same thing with ChatGPT, like about 50% of their training data is off of social media data, like Facebook, Reddit, like every social media platform, because that's the only way to get enough data to train these models. And then even with that data, it's still they're still not, we would need more data. But so they're just pulling data from essentially everywhere that they can. And then so at that point, there's no checks on any of this data that has that's trained any of these models, literally any model that's in existence. So anyone that has been aware of this knowledge for a while or from the beginning could have easily poisoned all of the training data in some way that every single LLM model is currently based off of, and no one would ever know. It's essentially, there could be a backdoor in every LLM model that's currently in existence, and no one would ever know. That's the bottom line of what this is, and then showing very clearly how easy it is to put a backdoor into an LLM model. And then so this last paper is what's the solutions that people are talking about within the status quo. And I think that this was a very good article that really explains it and breaks it down. Again, I'll link to this blog article as well. But essentially what this person argues is that same thing, that there's no way to prevent these problems within the status quo. There's no solution that we know of that you can actually do to get around it. Anything that's simple that you could think of has already been tried. Anything more complex that you can think of has already been tried. Again, like, there's multiple people like me that exist in the world where I want nothing more than to sell you this technology and have you put it into a business. Like, that's my dream. But I can't do it because this problem can't be solved. And if it could be solved, I wouldn't be talking about it. But so what their approach is very straightforward. It's essentially the dual LLM approach, where you have a privileged and a quarantined LLM. And then so the setup for this is very straightforward and pretty simplistic to talk about, which is that essentially you have two LLM models within your environment. You have a privileged and a quarantined. The quarantined only is the one that accesses and talks to users specifically. So like if a user interacts with the LLM model that's in your environment, they're interacting with the quarantined model. And the quarantined model doesn't have any sort of direct access whatsoever to any sort of information, like any sort of privileged information. And then what you have your privileged model that does have access to that information. And then so the quarantine model essentially acts as a filter, and then the privileged model can pass data over to the quarantine model. But very specifically within this, you don't want the quarantine model to be able to pass data back to the privileged model. So this particular setup requires a lot of sandboxing. It requires two LLM models. It requires a constant monitoring and everything that's involved within that. So once you start stacking all of those things on top of each other, you start losing the benefits of what exactly you get out of an LLM model, especially because the quarantine model is I mean, just being honest, is going to be very very stripped down as far as what it will be capable of, because you want to not give it access to anything whatsoever, and then you want to make sure that no one except for like very privileged people have access to the privileged model, and then so it really doesn't give you a lot of benefits over the status quo with this particular setup. But this is the best and most secure setup that we can offer within the status quo. And I think it's just it's more than important to highlight this, especially as you have some companies that move forward and they just don't give a rip about this problem. Again, I've shown you it's anonymized data, but I guarantee you it's Microsoft, OpenAI. Like, there's big companies that are on this vendor confirmation list that are still willing to sell you the technology. And then so to me, it's when I go through these ethical things and these ethical problems, I face that same thing up front, and it's the same thing that everyone goes through. And I had to make a decision. What do I do based off of that? And my decision is pretty straightforward. I'm going to be very explicit with these things. I'm not going to try to hide them from people. This is the way that it is. If you want to still choose to install an LLM model in your environment and in your business, I'm more than happy to help you and assist you with that, especially if you want to go about it and you're willing to explore doing that in the most secure way. Again, my most secure solution right now is this one, but if you have alternatives to this, especially, I would love to work with you on installing an LLM in your environment and in your business. But as of right now, anyone that approaches me about this, I have to bring up these things to them, and it's just imperative with what it is to state that my bottom line opinion is that right now in the status quo, I do not believe it is 100% possible to secure an LLM model. If you like this type of content, please like and subscribe. Thank you very much.